Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this wonderful, historic spot. I myself have never been in here before. It's so exciting. My name is Tula Christopoulos. I'm an assistant to Dr. Tom Papademetriou, and we're going to start off the program immediately with the invocation, which will be given by the Reverend Anastasios Bourandas, the Proestamenos at St. George Greek Orthodox Church in Philadelphia.
I walked over here, so just so you know that. So we're that close. Oli Mazid, the only way we can start today's prayer is with a hymn of the season. Christos anesti ek nekron thanaton patisas και της εν της μνήμασι ζωή χαρισάμενος. Christ is risen from the dead, by death trampling down upon death, and to those in the tombs he has granted life. Αναστάς ο Ιησούς ποτάφο, καθώς προείπεν έδωκεν ημίν την αιώνια ζωή και το μέγα έλεος. Σως Ανέστη, Christ risen. Thank you for this honor.
And thank you, Father Anastasios. And now, would you all stand, if you can, for the singing of the national anthem first, the American national anthem, and second, the Greek. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? Σε γνωρίζω από την κόψη του σπαθιού τη τρομερή, σε γνωρίζω από την όψη που με διαμετράει τη γη, απ' τα κόκαλα βγαλμένη των Ελλήνων τα ιερά, και σαν πρώτα τριντριωμένη χέρο-χέρ ελευθεριά, και σαν πρώτα αντριωμένη χέρο-χέρ ελευθεριά, και σαν πρώτα αντριωμένη χέρο-χέρ ελευθεριά. Bravo. Dr. Michelle McDonald has strong connections to both Stockton University and the American Philosophical Society. Prior to taking her position at the American Philosophical Society as director of the library and museum, Dr. McDonald was a professor of Atlantic history at Stockton University, where she also worked in the provost office for 7 years. Please welcome to the podium Dr. Michelle McDonald.
Thank you. It is my very great pleasure to welcome all of you here in the room today. This is, I will admit, a semi-surreal experience. For some of you, I am meeting for the first time. Some of you I have worked with for the last 4 months, and some of you I have known for nearly 20 years. So welcome all of you, and welcome to those who are online as well, since I know we have a virtual presence. You are as welcome, though you did not get to enjoy the wine and the snacks this evening, and that's on you. Next time, come in person. So, for those of you who have not been to the American Philosophical Society, a very brief introduction to who we are. We are the oldest learned society in the United States. We were founded in 1743 by Benjamin Franklin for the purpose of promoting useful knowledge. In the 21st century, we sustain this mission in 3 principal ways. We honor and engage leading scholars, scientists, and professionals through elected membership and opportunities for interdisciplinary fellowship, particularly in our semi-annual meetings. We support research and discovery through grants and fellowships, and we have a very broad range of grants and fellowships. For those of you who might be interested, you really should take a look at what we support, as well as lectures like this evening, publications, prizes, exhibitions, and public education. We serve scholars through our research library and manuscripts and other collections internationally recognized for their enduring historic value. And that is my wonderful position here at the APS. I am the director of the library and museum, and it has been my great pleasure to be in that position since the beginning of this year. We have a tradition at every program that I'm about to recite to you. We have 3 principal collecting areas here at the APS. Early American history, which is my own specialty, the history of science, which my executive officer reminds me on a regular basis is actually the largest by volume and by the number of users here at the institution, and a very large and important collection in Native American and Indigenous studies, and particularly in light of the latter. We read a statement that recognizes where we are every time we gather. The APS resides in Lenapehoking, the past, present, and future homeland of the Lenape people. We acknowledge and respect their continued presence and perseverance and express our sincere thanks for the past and ongoing generosity of numerous Indigenous communities and individuals who have offered their guidance, their expertise, and their opportunities for collaboration. In just the couple of minutes that I have left, for I don't want to take up too much time at the podium after this evening's event, I do want to emphasize this is for me a wonderful homecoming. It is a collection of my past lives together in one room, and you might think that I had something to do with this. I did not. This program was first conceived, I believe, in 2019. We call it the pre-times, the before times, right, before COVID times, when I was happily ensconced, I think at that time still in university, well, happily is a relative term, when I was still in university administration at Stockton University. But I was thrilled when I first came to interview at the APS, when I mentioned where I was currently working. They said, "Oh, Stockton, we know it well, we're doing a program with them." I'm like, "Are you now?" First time I had learned of it. But I'm really thrilled that I'm here to help celebrate it. And so with that in mind, I would like to invite my long-term colleague, Professor Tom Papademetriou, who was there when I first joined Stockton in 2006, to the podium to introduce you to this evening's program. Thank you.
Christos Anesti. It's nice to see everybody tonight. Michelle, really, I was so pleased today because I was able to take the opportunity with Dr. Kitromilides, and we were able to see some of the materials inside the library, and I said, I am so happy for Michelle. She landed in such a wonderful place. It's well-deserved, and good luck to you. Kalli dynami, good strength to you in your career. Thank you all this evening for being with us. On behalf of the faculty and the students of the Dean C. and Zoe S. Pappas Interdisciplinary Center for Hellenic Studies, I welcome you to this evening's Reverend Dr. Demetrios J. Constantelos Memorial Lecture. And also thank you to all those who are attending online. We're extremely honored this evening to have Professor Paschalis Kitromilides deliver this lecture in honor of Professor Constantelos on the topic Liberty's Odyssey, American Models of Liberty in Greek Enlightenment and Revolution. This would be a topic Professor Constantelos would be particularly enthusiastic about. He himself had published articles on the correspondence of Thomas Jefferson and Adamantios Korais. I'm sure Professor Constantelos would also be thrilled we are here this evening at the American Philosophical Society. We began this discussion, as Michelle said, prior to COVID, and according to Bob Hauser's line, he says, in the times of the Greek Revolution, that was his, and we're pleased to finally realize this evening. As you know, this is the oldest learned society in America, established by Benjamin Franklin in 1743, and as Michelle said, it is dedicated to the promotion of useful knowledge. But there's also this other element I think that was important and ties into the values of Professor Constantelos. The founders believed it was to enable the spirit of inquiry, their free exchange of ideas, and the conviction that intellectual thought and critical inquiry are inherently in the best interest of the public. So those values, I think, Father Constantelos, Father Demetrios, felt very deeply. I would like to thank Bob Hauser, the executive officer, and all the wonderful people who work here at the American Philosophical Society. Michelle McDonald, who I actually am a bit sad is not at Stockton anymore, but we're happy to come visit. And also, in particular, Jessica Frankenfeld, who is the Director of Programs and Communications Officer. I'd also like to thank those who set the room and those who are catering, and also all the staff doing all the other work to make this possible. We're so pleased to have you here this evening for this event. Before we hear from Dr. Kitromilides, I just wanted to reflect a moment more on Professor Constantelos, and simply to say that one of the things that he believed in was the striving for excellence, for areti, in scholarship, in teaching, in his priestly duties as a priest of the Greek Orthodox community. And his hallmark and his emphasis was philanthropia, of philanthropy, the love for mankind. This was not just a theoretical idea for him or a historical study, which was among the work still remains very significant, but he embodied it in his daily life and his interactions with each of us. One of the ways we honor him also, in addition to this lecture, is we have his library at Stockton. And there we have the Constantelos Hellenic Collection and Reading Room, located on the second floor of the Bjork Library. He personally donated his collection, and as we noticed yesterday with Professor Kitromilides, when we went through the volumes and the collection, it was quite a significant collection of books, and some of which Professor Kitromilides has even written about. These are first edition things that we have. So it was very exciting to hear hear outside affirmation of this as well. One of my cherished memories of Father Demetrios, as we called him as well, is him sitting in the reading room among the books he had donated, and he would sit there as I would kind of pass by, because my office was close by, and I'd see him, and he'd have his the book on the table he'd be reading, and he said, "Did I read this?" And it wasn't that he forgot that he read it, but he was reading it again with fresh eyes. And because it was clear he had already written and notated all of these volumes, but he found this opportunity to spend, and I think that's the creative mind, someone who is unafraid to challenge basic assumptions they already had, not assuming that they know things and can move on, but will revisit these things. And I think this is part of the spirit. I will also say that we are part of the Pappas Center. And I do want to take a moment to acknowledge Dean and Zoe Pappas as we are the Interdisciplinary Center. And one of the important things that we focus on is the disciplines of Greek language, history, culture, classical archaeology, history, philosophy. We have here tonight Professor David Rosell, who is our professor of Greek, a number of other professors who are unable to be with us, but we have our historians as well, Professor Hayes and Murphy, who are also associated with us. Very pleased that you could be with us. We also have Dr. Michael Barani and Michael Smalling, who are with David Rosell runs a program called From Troy to Ithaca, which is a veterans program where they read the Iliad, they travel, the Iliad and Odyssey. This year they traveled to Troy and to Greece. They made the return journey home, the Nostos, right? And so it was a very profound experience. And for that, we thank the Pappas Family Foundation and Zoe and Dimitri and Eleni and their family for committing to supporting that program. I think this is kind of all I want to say. We have so much more going on at Stockton, so keep posted if you want. Follow us on our Facebook page and other things. Get on our email list. Now I wanted to turn to our speaker. It's a great honor to make this following introduction. Professor Paschalis Kitromilides is originally from Cyprus. He studied as an undergraduate at Wesleyan University. He received his PhD from Harvard University and served Greek higher education at the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens since 1980 to 1916 as professor of political science in the Department of Political Science and the public administration of the Faculty of Law. He has been the director of the Center for Asia Minor Studies, and it's in this context that I had the privilege of working with him for several years, since 2014, every 2 years, running a seminar of students going to the Center for Asia Minor Studies, and then we traveled to Cappadocia. This past year went to Izmir, Smyrni, all the way to Brusa and to Istanbul, and among the many other activities he does. He's well published. You'll see in the back of the room, he is the editor of the definitive critical dictionary of the Greek Revolution, published by Harvard University. So those of you who might want a copy and signed copies, the proceeds will go to the APS. So we're pleased for that. But also he is the author of and editor of over 50 books, over 280 articles, book reviews in academic journals. He's been translated into English, of course. He writes in English, in Greek, French, Russian, Romanian, Serbian, Bulgarian, Turkish. And of course, one of the things I want to acknowledge, he is also a member of the Academy of Athens, which is a very high honor. We have Professor Neamas as well, who's here, also a colleague from the Academy, and we're pleased that you're also joining us. Tonight's lecture has the title, Liberty's Odyssey, American Models of Liberty in Greek Enlightenment and Revolution. And this evening you'll hear, he will be discussing the reception of American ideas of liberty and constitutional government in the era of the Greek Enlightenment, as well as into the revolutionary period. So it is a great honor to present Professor Paschalis Kitromilides.
Thank you, Tom. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as a person who has spent his life in the study of the Enlightenment, I feel greatly moved to be speaking in this historic hall tonight of Benjamin Franklin's foundation. And you will be hearing a lot about Benjamin Franklin in what I have to tell you tonight. And of course, I'm most grateful for this opportunity. And I wish to thank my friend and colleague Tom Papademetriou and Stockton University for their invitation. And I was delighted to visit the beautiful campus of Stockton University yesterday and visit the Demetrios Constantelos collection in the Dean and Zoe Pappas Interdisciplinary Center, which is doing such good work in promoting the study of Hellenism at Stockton and in America. Additionally, I feel greatly moved and honored for the chance to present the lecture commemorating Father Demetrios Constantelos, a scholar whom I had the privilege to meet and whose work I greatly admired, especially his work on Byzantine philanthropy. And of course, I retain a very vivid recollection of my last meeting with him during a visit to Mount Athos back in the 1990s, after a conference at Chalkidiki. We visited Mount Athos, and I remember him there celebrating liturgy in the monastery of Xenophontos. And that is a very fond memory, and I was very pleased that in a way I reconnected with him by visiting his books yesterday at Stockton. What I have to present to you tonight has mainly to do with my work over a long period on the development of modern Greek political thought as part of the tradition of European liberalism. And in doing this research and reading the sources and studying the bibliography, I engaged to a considerable extent in a dialogue with French intellectual currents since the Enlightenment. French culture and political thought provided the primary stimulus to the multiple intellectual traditions of continental Europe in their transition to modernity. Within this broader context, pertinent influences and models were decisive in shaping the cultural orientations in the Greek Enlightenment and the ideological pursuits of the Greek Revolution. By looking at French intellectual traditions and debates at the climax of the European Enlightenment and during the French Revolution, the intellectual historian comes to appreciate the role and impact of one more complex of ideological influences emanating from across the Atlantic, the inspiration provided by the American Revolution and by the creation of the American Republic. In many ways, the French Revolution, which shook Europe from its foundations, was a response to what had happened in America. The rise of the 13 colonies to independence from the British Crown, the revendication of their rights that turned the former subjects into free citizens, constitution making and institution building in the first new nation, as it has been called, and the debates generated by these exercises in the construction of political liberty generated admiration and enthusiasm in French political culture and contributed significantly to the articulation of the claims of the French Revolution, the appeal of American ideals of liberty and rights, and their impact on the rising wish for political change in France was noticed with satisfaction by Benjamin Franklin during his residence in Paris, as we know from his correspondence. I initially became aware of the significance of the American models of liberty for French political thought, reading the works of two important American scholars who had been pioneers in relevant research many decades ago. And it is good to remember these pioneers, these early scholars in our research, and not only focus on the latest writing. So these scholars, Gilbert Chinard and Durand Echeverria, professors at Princeton University and Brown University, respectively, were important influences at the beginning of my work on the Greek Enlightenment. Gilbert Chinard was also a member of the American Philosophical Society, and it is appropriate to remember him tonight. Echeverria wrote an important work. Echeverria was Chinard's PhD student at Princeton, and he wrote an important work on the development of the French image of American society to 1815. In that book, he illustrated in great and often entertaining detail the French discovery of America and the enthusiastic response of the French intellectual community and of leading socialites in Parisian salons to the American Revolution. The task he had set to himself, with Chinard's great encouragement, was to write the history of the American nation which, I quote, existed in the minds of the French, and to recapture the mirage that the French saw glowing in the West, and thus contribute to a critical understanding of all mirages that captivate the imagination of the peoples of the world. And what I would like to do tonight is to lay out a parallel story of another European mirage, the Greek perception of the American models of liberty, and the hopes that were connected with those models for the Greeks as they reflected on their prospects for liberation. America is not a perceptible presence in the literature of Greek intellectual history throughout the 18th century. Very little is recorded. At mid-century, an editorial project to produce a world history with several projected volumes, published volumes on Russia and China, and a third projected volume on India never materialized, but America remained completely absent. But at about the same time, the great poet of the age, Kesarios Dapontes, became one of the earliest Greek authors, modern Greek authors, who referred in a work to the new world that was developing in the West, in the overseas territories of the Americans. This is one of the earliest references to America in Greek literary history. The first book about America did not appear in Greek until 1792, in order to partly remedy the embarrassing ignorance of the Greeks about the important new world, as the translator and publisher noted in a prefatory note. That work, however, William Robertson's History of America, a great representative of the Scottish Enlightenment, related the story of the Spanish conquest of the New World, and it contained nothing about the United States. The newly independent Republic of the Western Hemisphere finally imprinted itself on the Greek mind via the lively periodical press that emerged as one of the foremost channels and expressions of the maturity reached by the Enlightenment in Greek culture and thought during the first 2 decades of the 19th century, the period leading up to the Greek Revolution. In the pages of the most important journal published at the time, Hermesologios, Learned Mercury, America is frequently present, by contrast to the absence throughout the 18th century. In the first 2 decades of the 19th century, we hear a lot about America, especially the United States, in Greek. Very often, these references reflect the curiosity and fascination with exoticism that marked the European discovery of the wider world in that age. Thus, we hear a lot about geography, botany, sky-piercing mountains, astronomical phenomena, impenetrable forest and a prehistoric animal called mammoth, which it was reported had survived in the western regions of the New World. We hear about the new products that America sent over to Europe: tobacco, coffee, sugar. Amidst all the curiosity about America, some political items also crop up. Early on in the history of the journal, we hear about the War of England with North America until the establishment of the Republic of the United Provinces of Philadelphia. I like that very much when I read it, and I thought I should mention it tonight. We hear also about Native Americans and how they were different from native people of other continents. All of this in the Greek language gleaned from European sources, mostly French, of the period. In the announcement of the French translation of Carlo Botta's Storia della guerra di indipendenza degli Stati Uniti d'America, we hear how great had been immortal Washington for his military experience, philosophical cultivation, and especially for his virtue. In the journal's penultimate volume, 1820, it is proudly reported that the learned Mercury had been reaching even the great culture cities of North America, not only Europe, but North America. These two great culture cities, Boston and Philadelphia, it is reported, where all our educational and cultural movements are watched and appraised. It is added that 2 American students were at the time studying at the famous school on the island of Chios. It is also reported that Professor Edward Everett from Harvard College, my old school, had just bought in Constantinople and brought to the United States the first Greek manuscripts in the New World, 6 codices on vellum containing mostly religious texts. One of the 6 was a collection of Byzantine historians. It is interesting to note that this is considered an unfortunate development, and it is pointed out that it was urgent to heed Adamantios Korais' advice for the establishment of a museum in Greece where all such treasures could be collected instead of being sold and going away. Learned Mercury, in its 10 volumes, in fact constitutes a record in the Greek language of the rise of the new science and of secular ideas in modern civilization. Amidst the narrative of this epic story of human improvement and achievement, some names of protagonists stand out. Among them, pride of place is reserved to an American proponent of Enlightenment and modern science, of course, Benjamin Franklin. Franklin is referred to as the most intelligent American who had managed to bring thunderbolt under control with the invention of the lightning rod. Franklin is also described as a most critical mind and as the top among men of learning. We are thus witnessing the reception at the moment the Enlightenment was reaching its climax in Greek thought of the image of America as a prototype of modernity. This was just another version of the mirage in the West, of which Duran Echeverria had written so effectively more than 60 years ago. It remained for this image, this mirage in the West, to be intensely politicized once the Greek Revolution broke out in 1821. Protagonist in this development was the Greek classical scholar and political thinker Adamantios Korais, who from his Parisian exile had been the guiding light in the intellectual revival of the Greek nation. In his writings during the first 2 decades of the 19th century, Korais had devoted his intellectual labors to issues of cultural change, arguing primarily for the reform of education and language, as part of a moral revolution that would prepare Greek society for its advent to freedom and independence. References to America and its practice of liberty are absent from his writings in this early period. In 1820, however, in his prolegomena to his edition of the third rhapsody of Homer's Iliad, he informs his readers that the government of the Anglo-Americans possesses the best laws, equal, just, and common to all. As a clear sign of the Enlightenment marking the American political system, Korais mentions the absence of anti-Semitism in the American Republic, and the justice and equality marking the treatment of Jewish citizens by contrast to Europe. Reflecting and extolling the American Constitution and the political ethics of the Anglo-Americans dominated Korais' discussion of the challenges facing state building in revolutionary Greece once the revolution broke out. In his writings of this period, the mirage of the West throws a powerful glow over the prospects of liberty in Greece. And I propose to illustrate his perceptions of America by quoting a few characteristic selections from two of his writings of the 1820s. The first such work was the second edition of his Greek translation of a fundamental text of the Enlightenment canon, Beccarias of Crimes and Punishments. In his prolegomena to the 1823 edition, Korais suggests that what his revolutionary compatriots needed most in building their independent state was a legislator who would be an expert in political science, which means who would know how to unite ethics and politics. Such experts in political science can be found among the nations of Europe, especially the English and the French Korais mentions, but many more among the Anglo-Americans. And he adds, from the latter, it would be highly desirable to invite the future lawgiver of our political system. The solid peace enjoyed by this happy nation proves beyond any reasonable doubt how much care they took from the very beginning to leave nothing rotten in the structure of their republic. The challenge before the Greeks, Korais insists, after so many triumphs against their tyrants, was as true descendants of those who had taught humanity the lessons of equality and civilization, to build a state based on equality of all before the law. And he adds, of such a republic, a model we have in that of the Anglo-Americans. The second example comes from one of Korais' famous dialogues on Greek interests, as he entitled them, a series of writings of the 1820s in which he is making the interlocutors discuss critical issues in current Greek politics at the time. In such a dialogue, included in his 1826 edition of the Oration of Lycurgus contra Leocratem, taking obviously his clue from Plato and Cicero, and most probably from Lucian's Dialogues of the Dead, Korais makes one of the interlocutors report a dream he had of one of the celebrated heroes of the Greek Revolution, Marcos Botzaris, who related to him his encounters with great men and heroes of history in the Elysian fields, guided by the greatest of Greek poets, Homer himself. So we have really a kind of imaginary dialogue of the dead in this text by Korais. There, in the Elysian fields, Marcos meets also the two greatest Anglo-Americans, General Washington and Benjamin Franklin. In his initial appearance, Franklin is perceived holding in his hands the Constitution of the United States written in gold letters. And this happens at a ceremony organized in Washington's tent in honor of General Lafayette. They are all there. And I realized by looking at the Museum of the American Revolution here in Philadelphia a couple of days ago, that there's a big story about Washington's tent, of which you have a record here also. Next, Franklin appears in an intimate conversation with Socrates over the meaning of truth, virtue, and justice, and they exchange very interesting ideas. Eventually, the dead hero, Marcos Botzaris, manages to witness a conversation between Franklin and the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, over the rule of law in the cities of humanity and how to avoid tyranny. So, and the emperor advises how tyranny must be avoided, although he was an agent of tyrannical power. The conversation is further pursued over the question of safeguards against the rise of tyranny in states and empires and over the evils of aristocratic inequality. The abolition of any traces of aristocratic distinctions, Franklin asserts, has been the cornerstone of the American Constitution. Finally, Franklin addresses the Greek hero who had been a listener to his conversations with other famous inhabitants of the Elysian fields. The conversation inevitably turns to an appraisal of the prospects of liberty in fighting Greece. Marcos Botsaris reports to Marcus Aurelius and Benjamin Franklin the struggle and sacrifices of the Greeks, claiming that the deeds of valor of his contemporaries were no lesser achievements than those of their ancestors fighting at Marathon, Salamis, Thermopylae, and Plataea. He also informs his interlocutors that the struggle of the Greeks had earned the praise of the peoples of Europe, although their kings, he says, had supported their oppressors. Franklin notes that in any case the Greeks had been fortunate because their country had now been endowed with a constitution respecting the rule of law better than Solon's ancient constitution. And this because the Greek constitution had imitated that of us Anglo-Americans, Franklin claims, which is a constitution, he explains, that does not tolerate hereditary distinctions but opens equal prospects to all citizens to rise to personal excellence. Marcus Aurelius intervenes and advises Franklin to give to Marcus Botsaris a printed copy of the American Constitution to recommend to his compatriots. But Franklin assures the emperor that the Greeks were well aware of it and were trying to imitate it. He also voices his concern, nevertheless, that the Greeks were not yet strong enough to empower the Constitution and keep it. The dream appeared to be reaching a critical climax at this point, as Franklin was preparing to make a prophecy about the future of Greece. But at that point, the dreaming interlocutor in Korais' story is woken up by a Valka servant, so we miss hearing Franklin's prophecy. Through the narrative, however, Korais manages to add force to his arguments in support of representative democracy in Greece, and by invoking the American model, he turns the founders of the American Republic, Washington, Jefferson, Franklin, into guides of the liberation of Greece, adding them practically to the pantheon of the Greek War of Independence. To cement his argument in favor of republicanism, a non-monarchical regime, and democratic equality, Korais draws extensively on sources of European and American political thought, including the Federalist Papers, which he uses in a French translation. He was, I assure you, extremely well read. And he quotes the Federalists on these particular issues. He refers to it twice, once as a way of voicing his critique of direct democracy. He says, the practice of democracy by the ancient Athenians is not appropriate for modern democratic states. And secondly, as part of his persistent argument against aristocratic privileges. Meanwhile, things had been on the move in revolutionary Greece. After the military and naval victories of the first 2 years of the revolution and the liberation of Greek territories in the Peloponnese, central Greece, and the Aegean Islands, the Greeks set themselves the task of building a modern democratic state. Let's have, you have an image of the spread of the Greek Revolution. The challenge was obviously formidable, but the Greek model again, but the American model again provided inspiration and hope. On the 1st of January, 1822, the First National Assembly proclaimed the Provisional Constitution of Greece, and on the 15th of January, on the completion of its sessions, it issued the Declaration of Greek Independence. It was a remarkable text, a monument of the long road Greek political thought after centuries of subjection had traveled toward liberal modernity. The declaration announced that the Greek War of Independence, far from being motivated by demagogic or subversive principles or by self-seeking intentions on the part of a section of the Greek nation, was in fact a war of the whole nation, a sacred war whose only cause was the recovery of the rights of personal freedom, property, and honor enjoyed by all well-governed peoples in the world. The revolutionary aspiration of the Greeks for the repossession of their liberty, property, and honor, as it is phrased in the Greek Declaration of Independence, can no doubt be read as an echo of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness from the American Declaration. The publication of the Provisional Constitution attracted the attention of many political commentators around Europe and America, including Jeremy Bentham, who read it in a French translation and wrote an extensive commentary, stressing the need to strengthen the control of executive power by the legislative branch of government and to secure the effective organization of the judiciary as a guarantee of basic liberties. In America, the Provisional Constitution was translated and published in North American Review by Harvard professor of classics Edward Everett. The indefatigable Korais also set to work during the year 1823 on an extensive article-by-article commentary on the Provisional Constitution. In his commentary, he repeatedly referred to the American Constitution as a foremost model of liberty available at the time, and insisted that his compatriots should turn to this model for guidance in building their own free republic. In his advice, he was quite categorical. I quote, "When the Greeks get a respite from their wars against their tyrants and turn to the task of writing the definitive as against the Provisional Constitution that had been introduced by the First National Assembly, they should do this by following in everything the political system of the Anglo-Americans, a system attested both by the judgment of all political philosophers and by the strongest of all proofs, experience, as the most perfect of all contemporary states under the rule of law. If the Greeks wish to construct a non-monarchical regime, a republic, as it is suggested by their Provisional Constitution, Korais clarifies, they have before their eyes a ready-made model to follow, and that is the Constitution of the American Republic. Exactly during that period, in the course of the year 1823, in connection with his intense reflections of the proper constitutional organization of Republican Greece, Korais took also another initiative in the direction of the United States. He wrote to former President Thomas Jefferson, whom he had met in Paris sometime in 1788-89, shortly after Korais had settled in Paris, and asked for his advice on the constitutional organization of Greece and for his support for the struggle of independence. Korais expressed the hope for some kind of American intervention in the question of Greek independence at precisely the moment Great Britain, under George Canning, was finally getting actively involved. His hope was that an American intervention could counterbalance possible British support for oligarchical elements in the management of the affairs of Greece. American involvement, in Korais' eyes, would provide effective support to democratic outcomes in the politics of revolutionary Greece. It's part of his continuing argument and concern against oligarchical possibilities which he saw immanent in the politics of revolutionary Greece. In his response from Monticello on the 31st of October 1823, Jefferson made a number of suggestions on the organization of the executive and legislative branches of government, but stressed above all the need to safeguard 5 basic freedoms if politics in Greece were to be set on a democratic course of development. First, freedom of religion. Second, freedom of the person of the citizen as exemplified by the law of habeas corpus. Third, trial by jury as the best guarantee of the security of person, property, and honor. Fourth, reservation of the right to legislate and impose taxation exclusively to the representatives of the people, to the legislative branch of government. Freedom, and fifth, freedom of the press as the best means of peaceful reform and of the enlightenment of public opinion. So this was Jefferson's response to Korais. At the time of his correspondence with Jefferson, Korais, as the most eminent man of letters in the Greek world, had assumed the role of an informal ambassador of his fighting compatriots. And in this capacity, he was trying to alert international public opinion about the Greek struggle in order to rally support for the liberation of Greece and to secure the recognition of the new state. Besides Jefferson, Korais had also been corresponding with Jeremy Bentham on the constitutional organization of the Greek state. Furthermore, along with 3 other Greeks resident in Paris, Korais addressed a letter to President Jean-Pierre Boyer of the Republic of Haiti, the second independent state in the Western Hemisphere, appealing for support for the Greek cause. This initiative elicited the first formal recognition of the independence of Greece by foreign power. President Boyer responded, saying that we recognize Greece as an independent state, and although we cannot send you military support, we are sending a boat charged with coffee to be sold in support of Greece. Beyond these international involvements, the needs of building, unfortunately, the boat sank somewhere on the way. But Haiti helped. Beyond these international involvements, the needs of building a liberal democratic state in liberated Greece kept interest in the American models of liberty lively throughout the 1820s. In 1824, a particularly significant testimony of this interest appeared in a work published by a young and very promising legal scholar who had a great future ahead of him, Anastassios Polyzoidis. In a work on the application of the second Greek constitution, that voted at Astros in 1823, Polyzoidis appended translations of Magna Carta as a document outlining, as he claims, the basic principles of the British Constitution and of the Constitution of the United States. Most importantly, the publication included the first Greek translation of the American Declaration of Independence. Such early works were laying the foundations of political science and constitutional law as part of the political culture of the new state, and these early beginnings bore a remarkable American imprint. Along the same lines, in a work entitled On Republics, Peripolition, published in 1828 by another young scholar and associate of Korais, Ioannis Kokonis, the American example was projected in the concluding pages of the second volume as the model of hope for the future of European peoples in general. The author stressed the impact of the American Revolution on the coming of the age of revolutions in Europe and pointed out that the great lesson of the Americans had been the claim that they sought to enjoy the inalienable rights of humanity by becoming autonomous and independent. The argument of rights is the great constitution of the Americans to the world. Thus, the argument for inalienable rights, which are not compromised, Kokonis insists, by time or treaties or other arrangements, taught even the most oppressed people that they have rights, which others, similar to them, prove themselves capable to recover by fighting their despots. The movement generated in people's minds by such arguments and the success of the Anglo-Americans accelerated political change in Europe. This from Ioannis Kokonis. That lesson, Kokonis asserted, was now being tried out in Greece. The American image in revolutionary Greece was, of course, considerably boosted by the activity of American Philhellenes, people like Dr. Samuel Howe, who, through his engagement in fighting, but also in extensive philanthropic projects to alleviate the human suffering caused by the fighting, provided a broader image of what American society was and what it could offer to Greece. And this, in a way, the way that Samuel Howe's activities were perceived by his contemporaries in Greece, was part of the image of American society that was captivating the European imagination and which was to be so evocatively described by Alexis de Tocqueville a few years later. The finest hour of the appeal of the American model of liberty in Greek revolutionary culture was connected with the most heroic and moving drama in the War of Independence, the second siege of Messaloniki in the years 1825-1826. In the topography of the Greek Revolution, Messaloniki represented a location of major strategic significance because from its position in the lagoon, it controlled the passage from continental Greece to the Peloponnese. You see Messaloniki and its lagoon. Messaloniki is right there. And you see the lagoon around, which controls the Gulf of Patras, and thus the passage to the Peloponnese. For this reason, original Ottoman military planning for the suppression of the revolution had made the capture of Messaloniki a major objective. Laying siege to it for several months in 1822, that siege failed to produce results, and it was lifted on the 31st of December 1822. Messaloniki became the focus of revolutionary activity in Western Greece, and many Greek military leaders from further north, especially the experienced military chieftains from Suli, made their base of operation there. The reputation of the city for heroism and resistance, especially following the death on the 9th of July 1823 of Marcos Botsaris, whom Korais made a hero of his Dialogue of the Dead, stirred international Hellenic opinion profoundly. Lord Byron, with whom Botsaris had been in correspondence, arrived in Messaloniki shortly thereafter, and this greatly contributed to the city's international perception as a battleground of liberty, especially following Byron's death on April 19, 1824. Just 200 years have been completed since the death of Byron at Messaloniki. A second siege was led on Messaloniki on the 15th of April, 1825, which lasted until the heroic exodus of 10th April, 1826, 1 year of very close siege of the city. This dramatic climax turned the city into a symbol of sacrifice in pursuit of liberty, offering a lesson of sacrifice for freedom for all humanity. In elaborating their own determination for resistance and uncompromising dedication to the cause of liberty, the people of Messaloniki drew inspiration from the struggles for freedom of many nations, most notably the Anglo-Americans. The Americanized ideal of liberty appeared frequently in the reporting of the bi-weekly journal Ellenika Chronika, Hellenic Chronicles, that was published in Messaloniki by the Swiss Philhellene Johann Jakob Mayer from 1824 to just to the eve of Exodus in 1826. In issue number 14, in February 24, the journal reported on an address by the President of the United States, James Monroe, in which he stated that all enlightened nations of the world wish for the successful outcome of the struggle which the Greek nation was fighting against its tyrants. In the President's judgment, the report adds, the turn of events shows that Ottoman rule over Greece had been abolished, and this was interpreted as a first step in the direction of the recognition of Greece as an independent state. The reference to President Monroe's support for the Greek struggle was obviously a source of great encouragement for the Greeks, and it was repeatedly recorded in the journal. It was not, however, only the potential political support that might come from across the Atlantic that was important for the Greeks, as it appeared in the reporting of the journal. As it emerges from the pages of Hellenic chronicles, America offered something which was deemed more substantial. That was the model of political virtue and responsible leadership that characterized the public life of the protagonists of American independence. As political conflicts, civil-military strife, and regional antagonisms appeared to threaten the survival of the Greek struggle. A dramatic appeal was published in the journal in July 1824, which urged the leadership of the Greek War of Independence and those charged with administrative authority in the fledgling new state to look up to the example of the Washingtons and the Franklins in order to overcome the difficulties of civil conflict and make the homeland secure for freedom. To the standard of virtue of the founders, another American paragon was also seen in the behavior of former President James Monroe following his retirement from the presidency. The lessons of patriotic virtue and the example of the land of freedom and equality are becoming known from the other hemisphere to this one, a commentator noted, mentioning that President Monroe, after retiring from the presidency, all he wished for himself was to be called a free American equal to his fellow citizens. It was this model of American Republican virtue that the free besieged, as the defenders of Messaloniki were described by the future national poet of Greece, Dionysios Solomos, wished to celebrate by naming one of the bastions of the fortifications of their city after Benjamin Franklin. You see here a plan of the fortifications of Messaloniki, which over a siege of 1 year could not be penetrated by the Ottoman forces. And right there at number 7, you see Benjamin Franklin bastion. That was the big corner bastion of the immortal Franklin, according to the engineer of the fortifications, Michael Kokkinis. In fact, the bastion also gained for itself a nickname, Teripile, on account of the bitter fighting that had taken place at that particular point. So you see again the lagoon and the bastions and Benjamin Franklin bastion right there. And I'll show you some more pictures as the bastion survived later on. Where is in this movie? And you saw these are early 20th century photographs, and this is a mid-20th century photograph, and there is another photograph which I'm not showing because it's embarrassing, with the bastion being surrounded by high-rise apartment buildings. But still, the Benjamin Franklin bastion standing at Messaloniki. And I think that Benjamin Franklin's name on the fortifications of Messaloniki could be seen as the most eloquent declaration of how the American ideals of liberty inspired hope and determination in the Greek struggle for freedom and independence. And the American inspiration, I think, was more than a mirage, but it was a substantial source for guiding the future of Greece. Thank you.
Will you take one or two questions? Question?
You mentioned Lord Byron, who ultimately sacrificed his life for Greek independence. Were there any notable Americans who emulated him?
If there were other Americans who were involved, quite a few, as a matter of fact. Jarvis and Captain Miller and others who in various ways participated and helped the Greeks in the War of Independence. And most prominently, Samuel Howe, who was very young at the time, and he lived long enough to be able to come back in 1866 to participate in one of the many revolts of Crete for union with Greece. And there is a wonderful, it is in the critical dictionary, there is a wonderful portrait of young Samuel Howe dressed in Greek national costume.
I would like to know, since Greece modeled their constitution after the United States, why did they still have a king?
That's a very good question. It will take another lecture. But however, it is true and important. Oh, sorry.
I think Mike Hayes, and then that'll be...
That the first three constitutions voted by the first three national assemblies, 1822, 1823, and 1827, were non-monarchical constitutions. And they provided for a collective head of state on the model of the Directoire of the French Constitution of 1795. But the last constitution of these three non-monarchical constitutions, which was voted at Trizin in 1827, was eventually suspended when the Greeks invited the first governor, Ioannis Kapodistrias, to come and take over. And Kapodistrias tried to lay the foundations of the new state, but not in a parliamentary process. He introduced measures of state building in his capacity of governor of Greece. Eventually, when the three powers, Britain, France, and Russia, signed a protocol in support of the independence of Greece, they agreed among themselves that the new state would become a kingdom under a king not coming from one of the ruling houses of the three powers. So eventually they selected a very young boy, 17 years old, of the ruling house of Bavaria, who was King Otho of Greece. So this is how the original intention to build a non-monarchical regime didn't materialize. And of course, at the time, in Restoration Europe after 1815, it was almost unimaginable to have a non-monarchical form of government. So eventually Greece became a kingdom.
Yes, in all of the sort of modeling on the U.S. Constitution and the United States Republic, was there any sort of discussion in the materials that you've read about the sort of paradoxical maintenance of the institution of slavery in the United States? Sort of contradicted many of those ideals?
Can you repeat the last part?
Right, of course, the institution of slavery continued to persist in the United States into the early 19th century when the United States Constitution was being held up as a model. Were the discussions, those sort of laudatory discussions of the United States example, was the institution of slavery ever raised as sort of a stain or contradiction?
Yes. Well, you realize that the way the United States was perceived in Europe didn't go into the details either of constitutional organization. And what surprises me actually is that I don't read a word about the federal structure. So they talk about the American Republic as it is a unitary republic like the republics in revolutionary France. It wasn't that. The federal aspect doesn't come up at all. So the two elements that they are interested in and they stress, and we see that very well in Korais, but also in the others who discuss. One is constitutional government, the predominance of the legislative branch. They are very concerned about the possible tyrannical tendencies of the executive. And second, rights. Who is practicing rights? The Americans. And of course, they are not aware of all the complexities of American society over which this constitutional structure was superimposed. So that doesn't come through. But it's the model of rights, freedoms, and the rule of law. And of course, that is very useful in building up the political culture of a new state.
Okay, please join me in thanking Professor Kitromilides once again.